Flourishing Unfiltered, the podcast for high achievers who seek a professional life that feels as good as it looks.
We talk about the unseen journey of struggles on the path to success that people rarely talk about.
I'm Karen Smith, positive psychology practitioner and leadership coach and consultant.
And I'm Dr. Micah Nyhouse, positive psychology and self-leadership speaker and consultant.
Before we begin today, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording. We pay our deepest respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
As we share our stories today, we honour the rich tradition of storytelling that has been passed down through generations.
If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a review. And with that, let's get started.
Hey, welcome back to today's show, and I am so excited to introduce to you a very special person, Dr. Thea Gallagher. Now, for those of you who don't know Thea, she is a nationally recognized psychologist and anxiety specialist and is an associate professor and director of wellness programs in the Department of Psychiatry at NYU Langone Health. Thea previously held several positions at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, including assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry, clinic director, media coordinator, and counseling psychologist at the Center for the Treatment and Study of Anxiety, and clinical director of COBALT, a digital wellness platform for employees at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, Thea also serves as the Director of Wellness Programs. In this role, she is enhancing mental health support and resources for NYU Langone's healthcare workers through digital content, particularly during this critical time when so many healthcare workers have suffered various levels of burnout due to the strains of the COVID pandemic and its aftermath. Over the course of her career, Dr. Gallagher has presented at several national and international conferences, led dozens of cognitive behavioral therapy trainings, and published numerous research papers, review articles, and book chapters. She's regularly featured in national media outlets and hosts two mental health-focused podcasts, Mind in View and Insights on Psychiatry. Now, Thea is also a regular host of the NYU Docs Psychiatry Show on SiriusXM, a health-focused radio channel on SiriusXM satellite radio created in partnership with NYU Langone Health. And this is actually where I met Thea for the very first time when she interviewed me. Now, the crazy thing about Thea is that it's not just her career which just outshines everybody, but if you've followed her on Instagram, you would know that she has the absolute cutest family as well. I don't know how she does it, but she also has 4 kids under the age of 6, including twins. Now, Thea, I am so happy to be able to welcome you to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Wonderful introduction. I'm going to take that with me wherever I go.
That's amazing. Thea, honestly, I am in awe. I don't know how you do it all, especially with all your cute kiddos, who I sure are a handful. But you know what this show is about. I would love to start at the start, and that is your career is amazing. But what inspired you to become a psychologist and specialize, in anxiety and helping people with burnout and so forth? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me because I saw a meme recently that was like when someone asks you kind of a basic question and then you're like, oh God, I have to choose to like trauma dump or give them like the short version. But I will give you guys the trauma dump version because that is where it started. But so when I was a teenager, my younger sister was diagnosed with cancer and had like a 7-year journey with numerous different types of cancer, leukemia. I was her bone marrow donor. And so I was really connected to kind of her entire journey. And when she was terminally ill and at the end, it was a time to like say goodbye. And she was kind of going through the end stages of her life. And I remember the psychologist from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia came actually to our home. And we kind of had to ask her like, okay, how do we walk someone through death? Like, how do we kind of do this end journey? And she was just so helpful and so present. And it made me realize that I really wanted to be with people through the hardest times of their life and to help them navigate, because navigate that, because who else is going to do that? And it just really inspired me on a journey to pursue psychology. And then I went initially for counseling, and then I decided I wanted to get more schooling to get my doctorate and go into psychology, and specifically to focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, which, really focusing on evidence-based solutions for people. And then, navigating my career, moving toward doing exposure therapy with anxiety disorders and OCD, PTSD. And then in the last few years, I've really even gotten into helping people with wellness and well-being, that I've realized everybody can benefit from therapy, from, therapy ideas, strategies, interventions, mindfulness, all of those things. So really trying to now create a culture of wellness and well-being because everybody's struggling. And I think that's the thing. We're seeing that it's a spectrum of struggle. We're all struggling at different levels or in different times. We're at different places on that spectrum of our own mental health. So that's where I'm at now, is really trying to break stigma around mental health in media, but also helping people, and even working now and trying to develop some AI solutions to helping people even identify more closely when they are struggling or in a risk state, and doing more in real time interventions for people to help them thrive and have a greater quality of life.
Wow, I had no idea, and thank you so very much for sharing that. Obviously deeply personal and raw, I'm guessing. I always wonder, when you see someone who obviously seems so driven that somehow they can create a career like your own whilst having obviously a private life, a family, and all these other things going on in their lives as well. You usually think you wonder where that inspiration comes from, or that motivation and that drive, and often it is some experience like that, isn't it? And I guess to me it all very much makes sense now. I don't know, Karen, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to echo Marcus' message there as well. Thank you for sharing your personal story there. It does really help us understand, and our listeners understand, a lot around what drives you, right? And I was already I've written down a ton of notes already, but I've already written down that, I had a similar story as to why I got into the world of education. I had an educator that was just truly amazing and changed the way I perceived teachers as a whole. And I was like, I want to be that teacher. And I kind of get the feeling that you want to be sort of that person for so many other people in different ways, obviously, that doctor was for you and your family during that time, which I think is so beautiful. So thank you again for sharing that. I'm really interested to know, because, when Michael was going through your bio, quite a long list of accolades and exciting series of projects that you're involved in. Has there been a time where you've sort of questioned what you've got going on, and you're like, is there too much happening? Because I'm juggling 1 8-month-old. You've got 4 kids in your house, and I know how much joy they bring, but it also can be a big distraction from our work. But in saying that, even your career journey might have had its trials and tribulations too. Has there been any times where there's been maybe a bit of self-doubt creeping in, or you're like, am I not prioritizing my time well? Or is it all just glitz and glam?
Yeah, I was going to say, how about every day of my life? It is. I almost think this is a good exercise that people should do, is maybe make your friends read your bio to you, because you're like, damn, okay, I do a lot. But every day I feel like I'm fighting for my life. I'm failing at everything. Everyone's mad at me. I didn't get back to that person. Oh my God. So I think, every day I feel like that. And also, being in academia, you're not getting a lot of attaboys. So there's another reason, I think, even in the positive psych space, that you have to really kind of be your own advocate, your own cheerleader, remind yourself of those things that you have done. And all, again, one time my boss was like, okay, you have to like write a letter to get promoted of all the things you've done. And as I was writing, I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of things, but I never feel that way. And I think, I think part of that is, right, our human condition. And then I have ADHD, so I know that I can commit to things and overcommit. And sometimes I feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And I know that a lot of people can feel that way too. And then, you add a bunch of kids to the mix, and, you're also in this place of your career where people are asking you for more things, and it's exciting, but along the way, you're probably, you're not going to do it perfectly, and you're going to let some people down, and you're going to miss this email or this deadline or this thing. And I think that's part of what I've been working on in the last few years of my life, is really to kind of, accept like the limitations that I have and do the best I can with what I am doing. So yeah, it is an everyday, specific kind of struggle to remind myself, okay, you're doing the best that you can with kind of the time and resources that you can, but also I really am a big proponent of like good enough and trying to really live that way, and that fortunately works for me because I'm not really a perfectionist. I kind of describe myself as like a type B plus personality, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately too, that I'm not really, like, people would maybe look at me and think like, you're type A. I'm really not. I'm like a chaotic hurricane at all times but somehow like good things come out, and I can never show my work, and I could never say, people are like, how are you doing it? I'm like, I don't know either. I don't think I am, but I'm trying to. So I think that's generally, I could talk about more acute times where I felt like really down and lonely if you want me to go into that, but that's just kind of, I feel like a day-to-day struggle that I'm kind of dealing with, is that, and I, that kind of feeling of like, oh my God, like focusing on maybe the thing that I didn't get to instead of the 20 things that I did get to.
I think this is so relatable to so many. Maybe do you mind clarifying, maybe for those listeners who aren't familiar with those terms, type A personality, type B, or let alone B plus, and also maybe say a couple of words about ADHD, because you mentioned you have ADHD. What does that mean for you in your everyday life? Do you mind explaining a little bit deeper? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think, I don't, type A and type B isn't in like the DSM, but I think it's something that we all kind of collectively have decided on. And I see so many people, with their kids in these, kind of perfect photo shoots or perfect outfits, or I'll have a friend be like, oh, I'm too type A for that. I'm really organized. I'm really on top of my emails. I'm an inbox zero person. And I'm kind of the person who, this will give you a perfect example. There's the people that show up with like the extra toothpaste on the trip. I'm the person that shows up with the toothbrush hoping that the other people have the toothpaste. Like, I am like, you know what? If I have it, great. If I can find it at the bottom of my bag, wonderful. I am like that classic video that's like, I hope they take Apple Pay because I don't know where my wallet or my ID is. Like, God only knows where these things are. So, I have 40,000 tabs open at all times. I'm just trying to like figure it all out. So I think, this is just a concept I've been thinking about more recently, that I am very ambitious and driven, but I'm also like a hot mess express. And I've kind of come to accept that about myself. And that's been really freeing. Like, I'm 40 now, and I love when I go, into a job interview or even a situation where I know what my strengths are and I know what my weaknesses are. Like, I'm not going to be, I'm the person that you call in the middle of the night if you're like, well, actually don't call me in the middle of the night because my phone is off. But if you really needed me in a pinch, or we're like, I'm going to call you crying and you need to talk me through, I'm there, right? But if you needed me to like go get an important document from your house and drive it to the airport in the time that you need it and find it, like, that's probably not going to happen. Like, so, I think I've accepted those things about my personality. And I've tried to like even work within that. And speaking of my ADD, that was something that got diagnosed when I got my first job, and I fit that kind of that idea that everyone's been talking about of having like women are underdiagnosed, because I always did well in school, but I think I was doing a lot of masking, and I was doing a lot of like, I would feel overwhelmed, but I think I'm smart enough that I could get by and figure things out along the way. But when I got to the working level and I realized this is like a never-ending pie eating contest, there's always something to do. There's always an email to get back to. There's always an assignment or, something that needs to happen. And then I have a house to take care of, relationships, life. It just felt really overwhelming. And I kind of didn't know, again, how do I kind of focus my thoughts, my ideas, my days. And I realized part of that struggle was that I was like textbook ADD, and it's really been helpful to be medicated, but even as you can tell, I've been pregnant a lot, so I haven't been able to be medicated during those journeys, and I have to really kind of dig deep and focus on those CBT skills that help me to like stay organized and focused. And I also think one of the kind of the secret killers of ADD is this feeling of shame that I'm always behind, that I'm, my concept of time or organization or my short-term memory sometimes, it's hard to manage and to deal with. But I've come up with strategies that really do help me. But I've also accepted there's definitely going to be things I'm going to forget, and I'm going to do the best I can working within this chaotic brain that I have, but also realizing that there are strengths to it as well. I love the quote that says, people with ADHD make easy things hard and hard things easy. Like if you asked me to go, like I had to go on MSNBC one time and I had just had the twins. And I mean, my blood pressure was lower than you could have imagined. I'm just like, oh, whatever, live news, national show, got this, not a big deal. But if you were like, hey, you need to get all of your therapy notes done the day of, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is the trial of my life. So now that I understand certain things are difficult for me that kind of maybe are easier for other people, I've tried to figure out ways to even outsource some of that stuff, but also really trying to manage the shame that I feel when I'm like, this stuff seems so easy to everyone else, and to me it seems hard. And yet I know for a lot of other people, national news, to do a live hit, they would be shaking in their boots and I am not. So I've kind of accepted also maybe where I lack in other areas, they're a strength. And I really, I try to build upon those strengths in my life and say no to things that I know are going to be, in academic projects that I'm asked to do, really being honest with myself. Like if it's not, a heck yes, it's a no.
Wow. So much gold in this, Thea, and thank you so much for sharing all of this, because we always love to ask our guests, how do you navigate and cope with maybe feeling inadequate or not good enough. And I feel like you've mentioned so many pieces of gold there that I know Karen and I both can't wait to unpack in our little post-interview chat. You've mentioned that you have had to accept your limitations, or that's one of the strategies you use to cope. You reaffirm yourself. There's only so much you can do, and actually, I am doing quite all right. We should read each other's bios, to each other. Not understanding that you are good enough and you can only do as much as being good enough. Outsourcing a few things. I think that's absolutely incredible and very inspiring. And I'd love to know from you, if you were to package some of these strategies into pieces of advice for other people who might be struggling in their careers, maybe also with ADD, constantly feeling ashamed of constantly being maybe behind, who haven't come up with all of these strategies already. I mean, your background is amazing, an amazing resource for you to understand how to cope perhaps with challenges. Do you have any pieces of advice for our listeners who might just feel as inadequate, always feel like they're behind, just not good enough?
Yeah. I think one of the things I do is whenever I get like a positive email or a positive DM, I try to save it in like a file that I can go back to and look to, knowing I need my own internal validation, and I do work to get that, but it is nice to get those attaboys every once in a while, and to remind yourself of the times that you did well and people did notice it, because I feel like that is so fleeting, that compliment. And again, the one piece of feedback or criticism I can highlight or focus on more or feel really bad about. And so that's one thing I do. Another thing, this might just be a simple kind of intervention, but even batching my emails I try to do, where I realize that I need to like kind of sit down and dedicate like a period of time to doing them, because if I feel like I'm constantly being infiltrated with information, I can definitely feel overwhelmed. And sometimes that means it might be a couple days before I get back to someone. I really try to keep up as much as I can, but I'm not going to be that person maybe that gets back to you in that exact moment if it's going to take, more from me to do that. Another thing I do is that I know it's really helpful and beneficial for me to disconnect from my phone. I am the kind of person that if you're like, oh, hey, can you just look up what time the restaurant's open? I'm going to look at my phone and be like on Wikipedia about, the 12th president or something. I know about myself. I'm like squirrel. Like I can be really easily distracted. And so I have to manage that. And I've really been trying to be intentional with time away from my devices and not feeling obligated to get back to people exactly when they need it. And also something as a mom, I've really accepted something that's happened, I think, in the last 5 years, especially, is to accept that I am not stay-at-home mom material, and I'm very comfortable with admitting that. I think COVID really helped me to realize, like, I think it's the hardest job on earth, so anyone who's doing that, I fully applaud you and respect you and am in awe of you. It is not something that I can do, and COVID really helped me to realize that, and now I'm really comfortable with that, too. Like, I like to work, I like to use this part of my brain, and I can also admit that some aspects of parenting can feel mind-numbing, and that's okay, too. I think that's really helped, and just also kind of, I remember growing up and certain women were identified as really maternal and nurturing. I think I am in a different way. And so knowing my own way, and that might be that I'm kind of kooky with my kids and but I might not be the person who, again, has all the perfect snacks at the right time that they need and is perfectly packed. I do the best I can, but I've also accepted that I can be my own kind of mom. I can be my own kind of friend and person. And I think it's really helpful to lean into almost I don't want to reinforce this concept in myself that I'm like a disaster person, because I feel like sometimes I've overcommitted to that, but to be like, I'm a disaster. Like, don't look too close at what's going on in my life. But I feel like the positive take on that is to be like, you know what? I say yes to a lot of things. I'm doing the best I can. I'm probably overcommitting because I have a really warped concept of time, but that's okay. I'm doing it. And some things are going to fall through the cracks, and I'm going to be kind of have that self-compassion with myself as well. So again, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's where I'm at with all that stuff.
I love your long-winded answers, and I personally relate to so much of that, especially that disaster person and being my own version of mum and not being necessarily that maternal, and also, or in my own way,
right.
And also having come to accept that. And I think that is so important, and it's so okay. And I think we need more definitions in society of what it means to be maternal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really love this too. And as the more you spoke, Thea, the more I was like, I think this is just me in another person.
Oh, great. I feel so good now. I'm not the only one.
Particularly this morning as I was like picking up strawberries off the ground that were thrown on the floor, knowing that I needed to change a nappy, and then remembering that I hadn't written back to a friend 5 days ago that messaged me about something quite time critical. I was just like, oh my gosh. But I am also a really big believer in that, like if I've only got 50% to give in a set day, and I give that 50%, it's kind of 100% really, and whatever that percentage is. And that's been I think having a little one in the house definitely really encourages you to see the world in that lens, because I agree, some things can be quite mind-numbing, but also quite a good moment to pause, particularly in the midst of what can be a very busy career that you've got going on. And I want to tap into that a little bit, because I feel as though, and you also host a podcast as well, Mind in View, which you've had the opportunity to have some amazing discussions with your co-host there as well. But throughout your career, has there been anything that's really shaped your perspective on how you lead and the work that you do? Obviously, you've got a beautiful story as to why you do what you do, but has there been somebody along your journey that's really helped shift and encourage the way you think now?
So like a specific person?
Yeah, or maybe even I like a person just because it's kind of awesome to name drop and be like, this person was super influential. But maybe there was an experience, throughout your career that really helped and shape and form what you do now too.
Yeah. My current boss, I feel like he has some similar traits to me, and I think in academia, it's hard to have ADD and to kind of, in academia, I think it is kind of hard to be seen as successful there. I also have kind of an interesting journey to being a psychologist, in the sense that the longer backstory is that I actually dropped out of high school to be a professional ballerina, did that for a little while. Then I went back to community college. I ended up getting a GED. Then I decided I had to go to school, and I got my, bachelor's and then a master's and then a second master's and a doctorate. But I think, along the way, realizing that I don't fit the typical path to getting somewhere, but maybe I've realized that I'll start talking and I'll be like, oh, whoa, I know a lot about that topic, or, oh, okay, people are respecting me, or looking at me as if I know what I'm talking about. And I do. And then just kind of realizing that I have a seat at the table. And I do think along my career, there have been, people who have continued to encourage that in me, and who've seen that in me. And my current boss, Dr. Charlie Marmer, who does a lot of amazing research in PTSD, when I came to NYU, because with coming from UPenn, I felt like I was a cog in the wheel, in the sense, and I realized okay, I got to the level of clinic director. I was doing all these things I wanted to figure out that I could do. And then I got into that position, and I ultimately realized that wasn't the best for my strengths. And I'm sure you guys know about the Peter principle, that you reach your level of incompetence. But what I didn't love about that is that I was putting out a lot of fires. People were complaining about their bill or their therapist, and I realized, I am a good leader. I want people to thrive. I want to share the wealth. I want to help everybody be successful in their own right. But I realized also that it wasn't for me to kind of be on the heavy admin side. And I think a lot of psychologists end up kind of in their career and in getting into these admin positions, and they're directors and they're doing all these things. But I realized I'm not really happy there. That's not really the core of what I want to be doing. But it was really great for me to see that I could do it, but I don't want to do it. And that was a huge shift for me in my 30s, because I think in academia, you feel you have to say yes to everything. You have to prove it to people. I'm this director. And then I was actually, I feel like I'm kind of like a lone wolf, and I'd like to be more in thought leadership and thinking outside the box, and doing stuff in the media. Interesting story. When I started doing media at Penn, the girl who ran PR, she said to me, she's like, don't take this the wrong way, but we really like using you because you're not too smart. And she meant it's a compliment that I was actually saying things that people could relate to. And she's like, that's a skill for you to take really complex ideas and make them digestible for people. And I also realized oh my gosh, that's something, she's like, that's something that these eggheads, these really, really smart people kind of can't do. And they don't want to do. If you ask them to talk about one of the first media things they asked me to talk about was road rage. And I was like, well, I'm not a specialist in road rage. And my one friend was like, but you can apply that to CBT, anger, how do you manage emotions? And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And she said so many people kind of pigeonholed themselves to being I can only talk about my specific topic, and anything outside of that I can't do. And so they kept using me for media things. And I realized, okay, that's a skill set. The idea of thought leadership, thinking outside the box. And my current boss, Dr. Marmer, I think he sees that in me. And when I came on board, he was like, hey, he's like, we want you to do more media and communications. Here's your Sirius XM show. Also here, in my old job, my boss had told me, you have a PsyD, you're not a PhD, you'll never write a grant, you're not a good writer. And then my boss was like, hey, there is this DARPA grant that I want you to write. And I was like, I can't write that. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna write that. And I wrote it and it got accepted. And, we're doing all this amazing work and I really care about the work. And I was even recently at a DARPA meeting, and I was presenting and I was so nervous. I'm with the smartest people in the world. And I was, I haven't been that nervous in a while, and I gave up, and I gave that presentation, and I've had like 3 people reach out to me saying like, your presentation was amazing. Can we collaborate? Can we work together? So I think it's moments like that of also, coming back full circle, knowing that I have a seat at the table, but it's an iterative process. I have to keep reminding myself, Thea, you have a seat at the table. And even recently, I was at this leadership meeting with all of these like kind of big time leaders in the institution, and they were talking, and all of a sudden I just like went on a rant about my thoughts about wellness and well-being, and they were all like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I'm like, I don't even think I said anything that important, but it was really helpful for me to know I have a skill set and I have a set of knowledge that can help people, and can help other leaders, that can also help the every person with kind of taking these big concepts and making them digestible.
Thea, so much great advice. I know you've published some book chapters, but I really need you to write a book because I need to read it. I would love to.
I'm dying to write one, so you need to teach me how I can get there.
Oh, I don't know if I've got anything. I love that you mentioned the Peter Principle, and I love that you briefly explained what that is. I'm pretty sure Karen and I are going to dive into that in our post-interview chat. Before we wrap up, I would like to ask you for any tips, because I know the Peter Principle is so common that people keep climbing the career ladder until they land in a position that doesn't really play to their strengths anymore. But they so often stay in them because it's more reputable than maybe going a step backwards, or maybe stepping sideways, or stepping into something completely different. What piece of advice could you share with a person like that so they can actually recognize that even though the position they're in now is more reputable, maybe paid better or whatsoever, is maybe not the best option for them? How can they recognize that and maybe then also summon the courage to, change course in their career?
Yeah, I think it's really important to ask yourself this question. Just because I can do it doesn't mean I want to do it, and doesn't mean I might be really good at it even. But is it bringing me joy? Is it really checking off the boxes of my passion? And has there been a job before that did, or aspects of the job, and really trying to dissect what you've done in the past that, brings you joy. And for me, I realized that I'm a bit of a journeyman, that I don't like doing one thing. I like to do a bunch of different things, which a lot of people don't like to do. So I'd like to I always want to have a hand in patient care, right? I always want to be doing stuff in the media. I love having a hand in research. And I've really cobbled together this kind of unique career for myself that's actually worked. So I think really thinking about what you actually enjoy and how much of that you enjoy, because I do enjoy patient care, but I know if I'm seeing too many patients in a week, not good for me. I also love doing some research, but if my whole career is research, I'm not happy. I also like doing a lot of media and communications. And the nice thing about that is that it's always something different. With Sirius, it's a different guest. I'm learning something different. So I feel like I could do that a lot because it's so diverse in the topics. So I think really asking yourself that question, and then really prioritizing your own happiness and your own self-worth, because I realized my self-worth was tanking kind of as a result of doing things I didn't want to be doing. And maybe I was good at it objectively, but it didn't feel like I was good at it, and it wasn't really bringing me a lot of those intrinsic rewards. So really asking yourself that question and take that risk, because even something like my social media, I feel like I just kind of fart around on there. I've been trying to be a little bit more organized with it, but I had somebody from a reality show reach out to me, and they were like, we really want you for this show. And I don't know if I'm going to get it, but I'm manifesting it for 2025.
Oh, really?
But they did reach out to me, and I was like, hey, can I ask you a question? Because I'm not really organized with what I'm posting. I kind of a little ramshackle in my life. They were like, you come across really authentic and relatable. And I was like, boom, that's it. That's all I want to do. I want to be authentic and relatable. And I want to give people bite-sized pieces of psychology that they can take with them and use with them. And every week I'm learning something new, and I want to get that knowledge into people's hands, and then they can utilize it and they can have a better quality of life.
Can only echo that. 100% authentic and relatable. I love your Insta.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all I'm trying to do.
And a lot of fun to follow along as well. And I think the bite-sized parts of psychology sort of broken down in a really relatable way is something that you definitely do really well. And I want to echo the sentiment that was mentioned earlier, that that is a unique skill, and not everybody has that. And I know that when I go and sit in lectures and I see change models and the diagram's got like 30 elements to it, I'm like, that's not going to land well with like the people I'm working with. Like, there has to be a better way. So I think there is a real knack for it. And yeah, it's great that you're utilizing that strength of yours and, doing good with it as well. I think there's something beautiful about that. Thea, there's been so many beautiful things that we've touched on here. And as Michael mentioned, we're going to have an amazing post-interview chat as well. But for our listeners, they might be interested in learning a little bit more, or actually even before we get to that part, have you got anything exciting coming up? I mean, I feel as though there's so many exciting things happening right now, but is there anything exciting happening in the near future that the listeners might be interested in following along and learning more about?
Well, my twins are going to be turning 3 on December 15th, so stay tuned for that. No, that is an exciting milestone in my life because I feel like they're finally getting a little bit of independence, and I realize, that we've been in major intense mode the last couple years, and when you're getting out of the fire, you're like, oh, okay, we survived that. So no, that is exciting. But yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of plugging in, continuing to do what I'm doing. Serious shows. I'm doing probably like 3 media things a week, which is exciting. I am trying to beef up my Instagram to kind of bring some of that media stuff and have more synergy there. And then if I get this reality show in 2025, I will be very obnoxiously loud about it. So if you all can just manifest that for me. But follow along. I'm just living my life and trying to figure it out as I go, saying only yes to the things that's a full heck yes, and trying every day to think about how I can better society while also taking care of myself, and hopefully I can keep providing some of the things I'm learning to you, via Instagram. And I am trying to work on a 1-pager for a book. The book process seems very opaque and complex, but that is a goal for me. So Micah's going to help me get to that next level. But yeah, that's all that's happening in my life. But I'm hoping, aging is weird, right? But I keep reading all this amazing stuff about like really just leaning in and not letting it be a limitation, and keep pushing and doing all the things that you want to do. And not ambition for, ambition's sake and the accolades, but really for the things that you want to do. And for me, that's, making a greater impact in the world. And yes, I like to be acknowledged for that at times, but I also am, the best acknowledgement is when I have a patient reach out to me that I worked with like 10 years ago and said, the things you helped me with have changed the course of my life. Or, hey, I read this article and I related to it. What should I do next? Or can you help me find a therapist? Those kind of things really kind of keep me going.
Oh, wonderful. And believe me, we are all manifesting that reality show for you. Cannot wait to watch. Thea, we've been talking about your Instagram and all your amazing work so much. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you if they want more of you? And obviously we're going to link to all your, websites or socials in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Well, as I've mentioned, because I have ADD, I really do best with one platform. So Instagram is pretty much it for me. So find me on there. I get LinkedIn seems like, learning Chinese. So one day maybe I'll get to understand that. But find me on Instagram. And yeah, I do have a website that, needs to be updated, but it's not going to happen by me. So someone else is needing to help me with that. So that's why I did hire someone to help me with some of those logistics. But yeah, we have a podcast, Mind in View, that's a more casual podcast with my friend who is in maintenance for her OCD and has dealt with her own trauma and depression, and we talk about our mental health. And then I have a really nerdy podcast called Insights on Psychiatry. If you want to get into kind of the science of it all with world-class psychiatrists, there's some interesting nuggets to pull out of that. And we do have a new season that will be coming out also in 2025 that will have some video to it. But yeah, now it's my job to make these really smart people say things that everyone can relate to. So that's been the art there that I'm kind of hoping to get even better with. And again, find me on Sirius on Mondays at 11 a.m. You can always call in, and that, and even that show in general, you can learn a lot from. So.
Amazing. And Thea's Instagram handle is at Thea Gallagher PsyD, but we will link to that in the show notes, as I mentioned.
Lovely, Thea. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been lovely to chat, learn a bit more about you, your story, and what inspires you to keep doing the good work that you're doing. And on behalf of Michael and myself, and probably for many of our listeners too, thank you for the great work that you do as well. It's undoubtedly helping many people with their journeys, and I'm sure that from today's conversation there's plenty more tidbits of wisdom that they're able to take with them on their journey and help support them. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much. This was a real motivating conversation. I'm feeling even more pumped to do the work, so thank you for that.
All right, there we go. Back in the post-show, Micah. I tell you what, Thea had a lot to contribute. I feel like we covered so much ground in a relatively small amount of time, don't you think?
I know, and isn't she so well-spoken as well? I mean, it's no surprise. She's a radio host. I've loved it every time she's interviewed me. It always flows. She's got so much to give and to share and so much knowledge and experience. It's incredible, isn't it?
Oh, I totally agree. And I think, we probably could have spoken for another hour, really, quite comfortably. There were so many things that I would love to tap into a little bit further. The first one, I was completely blown away by her open. And often we speak with our guests before we hit record and just say, is there anything that, we don't want to touch on, and like most of our guests, there's I'm an open book, but she really got into it, didn't she? Talking about her sister and how that really sort of ignited this passion. I found that truly inspirational.
Oh, 100%, Karen. And I had no idea. And I just want to say at this point also, as you said, most of our guests say, no, I'm happy for you to talk about anything and ask me about anything because I know what this show is about and that we're asking about, what's behind the curtain. It doesn't mean that we automatically assume everybody is happy and comfortable talking about traumatizing life events. And this was certainly one of those moments where I thought, wow, this is very, very brave for her to talk about, because, I've got personal history with cancer in my family, and I just know how deeply ingrained that can become emotionally, and that it can still, even years and years and years later down the track, can be really hard to talk about. So I personally really appreciated that. And it stood out to me also because, as you said, it ignited her passion for her career and it almost ignited her purpose. And to me, it stood out because, as you know, Karen, in positive psychology, we talk about how to realize our potential. And one of the things sometimes we talk about is a thing called post-traumatic growth. How even, experiencing those traumatic and really, really difficult and challenging life events, while they are hugely painful, can sometimes bring the best out in us, and ignite a spark and a passion and a determination that we would otherwise not have had. I don't know if you've got much experience with that yourself or through other clients.
Oh, definitely. Personally, 100%. And I had a pretty interesting upbringing, and I could see in Thea's story a little bit of my story. And I think at one point I even said, Thea, the more I hear, the more I realize I'm you. There was some really close relations there in what she was talking about. But it's interesting how those different experiences that we have can inform our direction, and not obviously to the extent as Thea, but I remember even when I was at school, I had a pretty ordinary time at school growing up, and I just remember that I had a beautiful teacher, and I'm going to name drop here, Trish Pongras, if she's ever listening, or hopefully this gets passed on, but she sat me down one day and she said, I can see you got potential. What do we need to do to turn things around for you? And for me, that was just the moment where I was like, I want to be a teacher. I want to do what you just did for me to more people, because more people need that. And that's been, I tell a much longer story of that in workshops, but it is interesting. I feel as though many of us have got stories where there's a catalyst moment where we've gone, all right, this is why I want to do what I do, and this is why I'm passionate about it. And not all of them need to come from like a really traumatic experience as well. But it is interesting hearing of those stories that have stemmed from post-traumatic, or where post-traumatic growth occurs. I'm always fascinated to hear where people end up.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure if your experiences have been the same.
Just mentioned that. Yeah, absolutely. And I just love what you mentioned just then. It doesn't always have to be a big T trauma or even a small T trauma kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a major traumatic event in life. But I guess the point is that when we experience challenges and times that are difficult and painful, it doesn't mean they have to break us and just leave a scar. Excuse me. Sometimes it just really can, ignite a spark. Those moments can turn into such beautiful things and paths in life that we otherwise would have not had. And I think it's just so beautiful to keep that in the back of our minds as we go through those challenging times as well.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And, if I think back even to my own childhood experience, there's the ACE questionnaire, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. I think it's probably the only test that I've got close to scoring 100% on in my life. But it's interesting. I think that those experiences definitely help shape who I am and my drive to want to support other people to find and discover, the best version of themselves. So, It is super fascinating. I love hearing people's stories. But Thea touched on so many other great things as well. And I wrote down all these beautiful notes around, I've said here, accepting limitations and understanding where you're at, and also recognizing that, she said in her words, I have a seat at the table, and backing yourself. Like, it was really interesting. I don't know, is that sort of something you picked up on as well?
100%. I was latching on to every word she was saying. And again, we could have spoken to her for hours and still gotten so much out of it, I think, out of her. Definitely that resonated with me, because self-acceptance is something, and also self-acceptance as the first step towards self-compassion as well, has certainly changed my life for the better. Talking about childhood experience and so forth, I know that I've carried a lot of shame for many years of my life. I don't know, probably the majority of my life. It doesn't really matter even why, but I have, and I know so many people do, whether they're aware of that or not. And we can cultivate self-acceptance and self-compassion, and it doesn't make us slack off or anything like that. It doesn't make us worse humans. It doesn't make us self-absorbed. It changes things for the better. There is kind of came from clinical psychology and therapy, but it's used in training now tools called ACT, so being an acronym standing for Acceptance Commitment Therapy. So it's one of those behavioral therapies that helps individuals embrace their thoughts and feelings without that constant judgment. Even when those thoughts and feelings are challenging or sometimes negatively connotated, and instead getting them to commit to behaviors that are aligned with their core values. So it's not about eliminating negative thoughts or anything like that, but rather about encouraging that psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present. So it's very mindfulness based, and then acting purposely despite discomfort. And I find it so incredibly powerful. And obviously it's not just me, and I've done some training through Russ Harris in Australia and Rachel Collins, and I absolutely love that for acceptance commitment training in workplaces. But research shows very clearly that in comparison to other forms of therapy or training that are not so self-acceptance and mindfulness based, ACT is a lot more effective when it comes to a whole range of well-being outcomes. So self-acceptance being hugely powerful for our well-being.
And I'm wondering if you might be able to give our listeners like a really practical example of what this might look like. So let's just say, I've hit a roadblock with my work. I'm not enjoying work, and I'm stuck in this not so great space that I'm trying to navigate out of. Is there a practical application that you can see the ACT sort of approach coming in with here?
Absolutely. I love when you put me on the spot, Karen. Thank you. I think it's almost more important to look at ACT when those negative thoughts go against oneself. So for example, you're stuck in your role at work or in your career, and you take that as an opportunity to blame yourself. I'm just not good enough. I will never get anywhere, or something like that. So instead of doing that, just catching yourself out. So self-awareness is always the first step. So catching yourself out, noticing that you're having those thoughts. That is the very first step. And then reframing from actually judging yourself for them. So just notice them and go, okay, instead of thinking I am not good enough, thinking I am having the thought again that I am not good enough. Because in that moment, what you do is you dissociate. So that's a term we use to describe that we kind of distance ourselves from the thought. We defuse, meaning we acknowledge that we are more than our thoughts. We are having our thoughts, but we are not our thoughts. And that in and of itself can be hugely powerful. And we know, for example, that when we label emotions, I am feeling angry rather than I am angry, or I am feeling anger, or I'm feeling frustration. We know that when we label our thoughts and our emotions, that takes the heat out of them and makes them a lot easier for us to deal with and therefore self-regulate. So if we start by noticing, we make sure we don't judge ourselves, we defuse from those thoughts and feelings, and then we come back to ourselves, and that's when we basically get back in the driver's seat of our own, behaviors and thoughts and actions. Because right now, once we've done that, we can go, all right, how do I really want to respond to this situation? So that's when we can start acting values aligned. What is important to me here? For example, maybe self-growth and self-acceptance, and looking at, what do I want to do about this situation? Because we know that beating ourselves up about something is never constructive. So instead going, okay, what are my options? I can work with a career coach. I can look to discuss a completely new crafted role that I craft myself within the workplace. I can look for a different job. I can go back to uni. I can start by just using some of those profiling tools to understand myself a little bit better and see what might be better aligned to me, to pursue in a career. So there's lots of options that then open up. Obviously, if I know that I'm overwhelmed by that, getting some support is really helpful. And again, maybe working with a coach. But I guess that's where I would start if you're asking me for, for an example like that, a situation like that. Noticing, non-judgment, diffusing, and then looking at how you want to think and act and feel based on your values, looking at your options, and then going from there.
Yeah, and you did a brilliant job there. I mean, I don't know that I threw you well and truly on the spot there, but I knew that you had the knowledge. And it's interesting because, as an ex-school teacher, I was doing this nearly every day with students, right? And you have to do this because they very quickly can fall into almost a little bit of self-pity and self-blame for their actions. And, they're just making poor choices. And, it's one of those things where it's like, you're not a bad person for this. We might have made a poor decision here. What were the things that were happening in the lead up to that? What could we adjust? What could we do differently? And it's quite interesting. I find myself kind of having similar conversations with adults, but it's such a valuable tool, and particularly that disassociation part there where we go, I'm not a bad person because of this. It's a nice little reframe there. So thank you for being very open and willing to jump into a very practical example once again for our listeners. I think that's part of what makes a lot of this learning really accessible for people that are tuning in. So many great things that we covered off there. I feel like I could bounce into a whole bunch more. Maybe very quickly we could just touch on the Peter principle. Just because I try to set you up. I was trying to set you up with the previous question, like the organizational, like I'm stuck in my role, and then lead into this. But yeah, I mean, when Thea started going through this, I was like, yes, this is a good one. I'm not too sure if you had any experience with this, or was it something that like jumped out to you as well?
Yeah, 100%, because I mention it all the time. And I don't know if you even know, but I started off as an organizational psychologist. So I specialized in both organizational psychology and health psychology. But when I still lived in Europe, I worked as an organizational consultant in a big corporate firm. And so Peter Principle is something that came up all the time because we did assessment centers, we did development centers with big organizations. So this came up all the time. And I use it and I talk about it to this day because I see it everywhere around me, especially working in-house for the government here in Queensland, Australia, where often people are stuck in roles that they kind of got promoted into because they outperformed themselves in their previous roles, and all of a sudden they're stuck in a role that is not really suitable to them anymore. And this is exactly what the Peter Principle is about, that in hierarchical organizations, employees are often promoted based on their performance in their current role rather than their suitability for the new one. And just for the listeners who aren't familiar with that, it's called Peter Principle just because it was named after the guy who sort of identified it or whatever, Dr. Lawrence J. Peter in the 60s, I think it was. So I think it's really interesting because as a society, we just value career progression and climbing the ladder, right? We love climbing the ladder. But there are flaws to that. And especially with the reputation that comes with having climbed the ladder really high, doesn't mean you're going to be happy with that. And it takes courage and it takes introspection and, again, self-knowledge, self-awareness to understand what is going on there and to get yourself then out of that.
Beautifully done once again. And lovely to tap into a little bit of extra wisdom. And I'm sure for our listeners, they're probably sitting there going, "Ooh, I could see this happening." And it does. Like, you know, I've worked in a couple of different workplaces, and just about any workplace with some sort of hierarchical nature, you can see elements of this occurring, or maybe even feeling it yourself as well, being a part of it as well. What if I'm someone that's stuck in that situation? Like, I am the embodiment of the Peter Principle. What can I do?
Well, start by recognizing that, obviously, and then you go back to the drawing board. And I think we touched a little bit on that with Thea as well. Is, you know, understanding your competencies, understanding your values, reflecting on why you might feel stuck. I think that's important. Understanding why you might feel stuck, because sometimes it can be because of burnout. Because the higher you climb, also often the more pressure there is on you, even in terms of your work hours and, you know, the type of responsibility you carry. Is it dissatisfaction? Is it just a lack of motivation? So really understanding that, or if there's really a misfit. And if there is a misfit, then you want to tap into your values, your own, you know, your passions. Where along the career ladder did things go wrong? Were you still happy in your previous role, or were there already some signs of you being on the wrong path? Might there need to be a complete career change? Or is it just that you might just be slightly placed better in a slightly different role within the same organization? Is it the organization? I don't know. So tapping into your values, your own career goals, the things where you can play to your own strengths, things you enjoy doing. And I think what's important is to remain creative. We tend to think in terms of what's available to us in the job market, or even in terms of positions offered in any given organization. We tend to forget that we can create our own careers. You know, and I've had to do that. When I realized that I was sort of stuck in the wrong career, I then crafted my own career. I know that not everyone is in the position to do that, but I certainly have had to do that because there were no jobs here for me in the, you know, career world that I wanted to work in. But we can also craft completely new roles within organizations. Takes a little bit of strategy, takes a little bit of creativity, takes a little bit of negotiation and communication skills, but people do it all the time. So I would say get creative.
Excellent. I love that little bit of advice there. And if we could steal Thea's words when we're looking for work or maybe the next role, maybe we should really try and carry that lens of looking at things and going, is it a heck yes? Because I believe that was what Thea said when she was looking at potential work and having that enthusiasm about it. So it's a lovely little reminder there. Well, Micah, thanks again for a lovely little wrap-up. Always exciting to lean into some of your knowledge and unpack some really complex topics with our listeners. So thank you once again. Really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you for listening to today's show. We hope our conversation helped normalize the struggles so many of us face on the path to success. While on the outside things often look like sunshine and rainbows, this is rarely the experience for anyone behind the facade.
But instead of letting that demotivate you, we hope it does the exact opposite. To let it fuel you to keep pursuing your purpose and realise your potential. Just without the added burden of feeling inadequate and a little more patience, some tips and self-compassion instead. For further info, head to our website, flourishingunfiltered.com, and get in touch with us via our socials, @flourishingunfiltered.
Now, if you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of loneliness, low mental health, or suicidal thoughts, please know that there are people who care and treatments that can help. We've compiled some helplines for you in the show notes.
It's a wrap for Flourishing Unfiltered today. Please give us a follow and leave us a comment and a review. We hope you tune in next time.